huge thanks to you, Jack, and the Kaya, Hayashin, for having me here for this talk. It's a really great opportunity to introduce my research. I've done my master's thesis at King's College London. I've just graduated, and so it's just a very exciting opportunity to present this piece of work that I've done, which had taken many months. I worked from January till September, maybe 40 hours, just focused on this topic, and so it's a really great opportunity. The topic today then is going to be collective return, refugee community and participation, which was very related to the people from Artsakh who were displaced, unfortunately, in September 2023. So I'm just going to do the first to the session plan. I'm going to start just by talking about background. Then we'll talk about the concept of refugee community, talk about the concept of collective return, talk about the concept of participation, and then I was hoping we could have a Q&A, but also I want to hear your thoughts, and as we said earlier, have a bit of back and forth on this topic. So the background then. Of course, they are a group of Armenians indigenous to the mountainous Karabakh Artsakh region in the southern Caucasus. They have their own cultural rituals, cuisines, dialects, I think, which distinguishes them from a lot of Armenian groups. And as I had mentioned, they had been displaced in September 2023 by the Azerbaijan military. So this brings me then to the concept of refugee community. The people had been under 9 months of blockade in Karabakh, in Artsakh, and after that 9 months they had been displaced and crossed the border from the Nagorno Karabakh Republic into the Republic of Armenia. This means that under international law, those people would be designated as refugees, which means that they are people who have, for reasons of discrimination or fear, moved from their home region to another legal area. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that's just the definition for refugee. But it's very important to note that as well, refugees are not just individuals, they can also be a community, which means that they are part of a group of people, a community that is, who have memory and collective experience of refugee displacement. So it's not just a legal term in that sense, but it's very important to note that they have this new identity that kind of binds them together. Whereas before it might have been the Nagorno Karabakh Republic, life in Artsakh. Now their new identity, or what they're looking at, is this idea of being a refugee community. So why is that relevant? I had travelled to Yerevan in April 2024, having spent the first 3 months of 2024 making contact with as many people as possible. I used this technique called snowballing, where you simply talk to people. They then will, after building a relation, decide whether to help you with the research, and ultimately the snowballing then ended up meaning that I spoke to 13 what we would call community leaders from the refugee community. So this means that there are people who are have authority, who have the trust of the community, can sort of represent the community, and are just seen as pillars of the community, and therefore it's very valuable to get their insight on how things are. And this was in April 2024. If we go back then, this was in the context of the bilateral peace process between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. This started in December. At that time, if you recall, the Tavush for Homeland movement had just begun, so things were quite tense, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the region. and there's a lot of change going on, so it was a very interesting time to be in Yerevan to interview these community leaders. They were asked about their views on collective return and participation, which I'm going to define. And this was also, as I've just mentioned, in the context of the ongoing bilateral peace process. At that time, I think Aliyev has just said as well that 90% of the peace treaty had been agreed, but there was some problems with the last 10%. Just on the topic then of collective return, what that means. Collective return is another legal term for when an entire community of, like a refugee community, is then returned to a place by an international organisation such as the UNHCR, UNICEF, and returned rather than just an individual returning back to a place where they had come from originally. So as well, as the research, I have interviewed these 13 leaders and collected a lot of interesting insights. I've included some of them here to share with you as well, because I thought maybe rather than just me talking and saying, it would be great to kind of hear what they actually have to say as well, and hopefully the most educational part is that you've actually heard from people from Artsakh and not just a Northern Irish guy. So yes, I asked about collective return, and this is what they had to say then. Sure. If you can't see it too well, this was from one interviewee. They had said, when asked about what is conflict resolution to you, they had said this would be collective return of Artsakh people to our ancestral lands, the ability of Artsakh people to pursue self-determination. This is a right enshrined in international conventions. And there we go again. We are still ready for negotiations. We all have one major aim: to return to our homes. So collective return is perhaps the most important concept for the Artsakh people. So then, when asked, how do you think this could work, or how realistic is this given the context? There was a lot of mixed reactions. Some people had said, I'm not too sure this is entirely possible at the given time. There's one there. This is more of a dream than a reality at this present moment. But I think what was most interesting was that people had not given up, let's say, on the notion of return. I consulted with many organisations while I was in Yerevan, and people had said things like, oh, this is dreadful, what has happened, there is no chance of return. And I think what really shone through was that the Artsakh people had said things like, basically the situation is so unstable and uncertain at the moment that perhaps in the next few years the geopolitical situation, or however it is, will transform enough that actually return becomes possible. So, as I said, collective return is just when a refugee community is returned to their place of origin as a group by an international organisation or a government. And it's basically been done when the refugee community has this idea of what return should look like. They share it with the international bodies, and the international bodies and the governments can say, yes, this is great, we have a plan, let's follow it and go with this. So then, one thing to say is that collective return can be very political, because in many contexts it may be very clear cut that the refugee community can return to this place. In other contexts, such as one of Armenia, Azerbaijan, it may be less clear cut and there's a lot of politics to deal with. So, yes, it is, as I said, very political. and basically requires a lot of involvement or participation by the refugee community. So I asked them a lot about how they felt about participation in the context of the bilateral peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and they had some very interesting things to say about that as well. But first, I'll maybe define what participation actually is. This is when refugee communities are prepared to engage with fora processes, and basically they get involved, people listen to what they have to say and decide in a safe way and decide, yes, we'll listen to them and follow what they have to say. This is a very legal definition, but the gist is that the refugee community gets listened to and heard. So what did they have to say about their own participation? There was a lot said. Through the 13 interviews, I must have collected something like 500 quotations, and obviously it's too much to put into one presentation, but the gist was that they didn't think that participation was really possible in any way in the context of Armenia and Azerbaijan. They had said that, or had actually, having analysed the 500 quotations, or however much it was, they had decided that basically, for many reasons, participation wasn't going to be possible. That was because there was a lack of trust with international organisations, a lack of trust with the Azerbaijani government, even with the Armenian government, and with the Armenian society as well. The other reasons were that they were quite, marginalised within Armenia. There was problems with housing, problems with jobs, employment, and so for all those reasons people were focused on those aspects of life and not too focused on getting involved with high-level peace processes between Pashinyan and Aliyev, or however. And the other reason, quite interestingly, was that after this displacement event, the politics of the refugee community were changing a lot. People were not sure who to trust, who would lead, and they didn't have a clear plan or direction for return. So of course, as I said earlier, it's very important that exists in order for people to for international organisations and governments to return people, but that didn't exist at the time I had presented or interviewed these communities. Interestingly, I think maybe in August, the Committee for the Defence of Artsakh, or however it's called, I can't remember, it's a very long title, Committee for the Defence of Artsakh, had met together. They had interviewed maybe 50 community leaders as well. So hopefully that means that there's a much clearer aim for the Artsakh community. So and again, some of the things they had said on the topic of participation. All people want to go back to Karabakh, to Artsakh, but no one wants to go back to Azerbaijan. So there was a lack of trust really with the Azerbaijani government, understandably, and they didn't want to get involved, they didn't want to have anything to do with the Azerbaijani government, and they believed that if they returned, there would be just more discrimination, and of course there was the idea that if you returned to Azerbaijan, you would have to renounce your Nagorno Karabakh passport and instead replace it for an Azerbaijani one. So at the moment the terms were not too favourable. There was fears that the long-standing negative relationships between the Azerbaijani people and the Armenians, like Armenophobia, would mean that their return would be detrimental at this time. So for all those reasons, people felt that they couldn't trust the Azerbaijani government as a negotiating partner. then in relation to international bodies and governments, there was a lot of distrust. People had said that things like peacekeeping missions, processes of return hadn't been thought about. There was a lack of focus as well during the blockade, and a lack of attention given. So for all these reasons, the international community wasn't very trustworthy either. And the other thing that had been mentioned was that I said, well, what about if we had the European Union or we had the USA get involved and kind of act on your behalf? And they had said it wouldn't be possible, we can't really tell if they are on our side. They are part of NATO, this belongs, Turkey is part of NATO, they import oil from Azerbaijan, how can we really trust them to look after our interests? So for all those reasons, there was a lack of trust, and this just meant that they didn't feel they could participate in peace processes. So I think very interestingly, one thing that had been said during the course of this research project was that it's maybe too early to speak to the community leaders. It's only been 6 or 7 months since the displacement event, so maybe it'd be inappropriate to speak on this topic. And I think this was reflected in this quote. I didn't expect anyone to have clear-cut answers, of course, because I knew that it had only been 6 months. They had said, I think maybe after 2 years we'll speak about the topic of conflict resolution. For now, all people of Nagorno Karabakh are thinking about Artsakh, their country, and about our graves and our cultural artefacts. But people were very pleased to talk on this subject, kind of have their voice heard. So I think interestingly, where are they now? This was one of the most interesting things as well, was that they were working very hard, the leaders, to preserve culture and working in different directions. People were focused on preserving artifacts, preserving cultural rituals, preserving institutions, and working very hard to kind of keep all of the symbols and ideas that had come with the region alive and well inside Armenia. So, for example, one person had told me that there was a lot of enthusiasm to attend Refugee University, which had been set up in Yerevan in the back offices of a technical university. And that was quite interesting. We went up a winding staircase and ended up on the 3rd floor, and this entire floor had been dedicated to the staff of Refugee University, and so many students had started attending that university in a kind of attempt to keep that institution alive. There was work in the education field as well. People were working to continue educating Artsakh children, although there were some struggles, as you can tell from this quotation, to kind of deliver education. But there was also political work done by charities as well. And actually, when I was there, it didn't seem that there was a lot of interaction between the civil society organisations, but they had said maybe this is something we should consider. It would be very beneficial if we all got together and kind of shared this experience rather than just working in individual ways.
So, as I said, basically things were very uncertain for the Nagorno Karabakh Armenians at the time. People weren't sure about housing, about employment, they weren't sure about return. Lots of things were going on, and I think that was, as time has gone on, especially with new sort of presidency in America, other things going on in the world, there's a lot of uncertainty around, and for them that can be a little bit alarming because they don't know what the future is going to hold. It's not just them, however, and I think one thing that they had really shown was that collective return and the idea of return was now a really defining idea of their community, and they really held on to it, and there was a real desire to keep the community alive, thriving, to maintain all of their rituals, dialect, cuisine, culture, and just preserve that. And even if return doesn't happen in the next year or 2 years, maybe in 10 years, 20 years, because of all this hard work that they've put in, it means that when they hopefully get the opportunity to go back, that's all that hard work will have paid off. And I think one thing was that was very interesting was that some international organisations I'd spoke with said things like, "Oh, they've been through too much. They're very." I think one word someone had said is broken, which was not very true actually. When I had met the people, they were very lively, very willing to speak on the topic, working very hard as community leaders. And I was just very amazed, really, and it was a completely different sort of idea than what I'd been told when I went to them. When I went to them, it was very different to how they'd been portrayed. So I had done some reading around it, and I came across this really great piece of poetry about the Karabakh people. And here it is, which was really great. I had put it up at the start of the dissertation as a kind of just an acknowledgement of the hard work that they've done, and so.
Sorry, Fergus, I can't read it.
Too small? That's all right. I can maybe read the first verse.
Yeah.
Okay.
This at the end, and we can read it.
Sure. That's kind of it. That's my presentation. I think maybe there will be questions, a lot of questions, so I put a lot of time aside for that. I put some time aside for discussion as well, because, as I said, I think it would be quite boring if it was just me telling Armenian people, or about their culture, about their history, and so I want to hear from you guys as well on this topic. So,